Welcome back to another episode of the Young People Podcast, conversations with young people on passion, purpose, and lifestyle. And we are so excited that you're here for this episode.
Yeah, today we are interviewing our friend Chris from Exercising Health. He's actually someone I've been wanting to have on the podcast for a long time. We've finally done it. It's episode 39. Exercising Health is here. So please, guys, pay attention to this episode. It's going to be great.
We're really honored to have a very special guest with us, Exercising and Health. His name is Chris. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us, Chris. How are you going?
That's my pleasure. Nice to be here. All good. Just trying to navigate through this whole lockdown period. I live in Cyprus, and restrictions have recently been lifted. So I went and visited the beach this past week. Really nice to kind of get back to normality. Nice to have this podcast.
Yeah. So what were the restrictions like over there? Have Cyprus been handling it pretty well?
Yeah, I mean, we had pretty severe restrictions, just like most countries in Europe. We weren't allowed to leave our house unless it was for, the essentials, supermarket, some physical activity, and to the hospital or doctor. That went on for about 2 months, and we have absolutely no restrictions anymore, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's insane. We're over here in Australia. We had a brief lockdown period, but it sort of just breezed over pretty quickly because it just didn't hit us that hard, which we're so lucky.
Really lucky
about that. Yeah. So, but we feel like all these other countries that are just getting slammed. It's really hard to see that. But yeah. So your page, Exercising Health, it's probably something that a lot of people would have gravitated towards, like your page and pages similar to that during the lockdown, to see how they can use that lockdown to benefit them. It's like, I can use this time to better my own mental health or my physical health primarily. I know that's what a lot of my friends were doing. So is that something that your audience, you think, have done for themselves? They've sort of used the lockdown to the best of their abilities?
I hope so. There's sometimes during struggles is the time where we see the most self-improvement. We're kind of forced into a corner, and humans are great at we survive. So we figure out, and we actually end up capitalizing on those opportunities. So even for myself, I felt like I improved my overall fitness and health during the lockdown, which was awesome. So I'm pretty certain that many others did the same. Yeah,
that's really cool. How did you get into your start your journey with health and fitness? Because you pretty much cover all bases, especially going into the new biohacking sort of realm, which is new to me, and you've really covered quite a lot in that. How did you get started on this path?
I've always been intrigued with the human body. It's all its nuances and complexities. I was early on in my childhood, I was a subscriber to Men's Health magazine, and I used to read those books cover to cover multiple times through, trying to absorbing all the information. Looking back, it was probably not always the most scientific way, but at the time it served me well, and it definitely it developed my interest into the space. And then I was always a keen golfer. I played golf pretty much the whole way through growing up. And in my late teens, I decided that I wanted to play golf full time. So turned professional. So I did that for 5.5 years. And, it didn't make it in the end. Tough sport, very competitive. But I learned a heck of a lot. And it definitely, for example, Tiger Woods, he had multiple back surgeries. He blew out his knee, best player that's ever lived. And I was always intrigued as to why that happens. Why is it that he was injured all the time? What biomechanical issues may he possess in his golf swing? Or, is it the way he's training? And all these questions start going through my head. And I think, the technical side has always been something I've been super duper interested in. And that led me onto a journey. I then founded CrossFit. I started I was exposed to now all these new different types of sports, weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting, and some gymnastics type of stuff. And I learned a lot through that, running and swimming. And then I decided, you know what? I want to go and become a sports scientist. So I went to university and I got my sports and exercise science degree. Then we started Exercising Health, and it's what we've been doing ever since.
Yeah. And how did you come around to the decision to start up Exercising and Health? Because it's a really cool sort of community that you can see online now that you've built, especially we've been following your stuff on Instagram for a little while now. It's really exciting to see sort of the value you're bringing to a lot of people. How did, explain that sort of process to starting up Exercise and Health?
Yeah, so I saw a little bit of a gap because, obviously health and fitness on social media is massive. And it's growing all the time. Unfortunately, though, it's not always the information that's being disseminated. It's not always, in my opinion, scientifically validated. Or maybe it is, but not to the level that I would like to see, that we see in academia, for example, things that are peer-reviewed, proper research, that's being, put out into the social space. And I said to, what's the issue here? And don't get me wrong, there's a couple of social media influencers that are doing a great job at that. The problem is, I found that these guys that when you get so caught up into the academic realm, sometimes it's difficult to dumb that information down and for in bite-sized pieces that sort of everyone can understand, because we take for granted whenever you've gone deep into your craft, you start taking for granted that you 10 15 20 30,000 hours into that field, and you've developed a language and a set of skills that other people don't possess. So when you're explaining these concepts, you need to understand that, not everyone's going to understand what the heck you're saying. And if you really want to help people and you want to get the message out to the masses, you've got to tone it down a little bit and sort of package it in a way that's digestible for the majority of people. So I thought, good information needs to get out there, but unfortunately, the good information that is out there is not always accessible to the majority of people. So how can we sort of bridge the gap? And that's why we came up with Health Science Made Simple. That's sort of our motto at Exercising Health. That's why we use the animation as well as much as possible, even though it's very time consuming. So it's because we feel like our mission is to take good science and make it accessible to as many people as we can.
Yeah, 100%.
So that's sort of the thesis behind exercising.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah, the animations are so cool. Like when I'm watching it, it's just like I can watch like a 2-minute video and it's just like, I get it. I understand everything. It's just so amazing. Do you do those yourself, or do you have a team?
So I'm very fortunate. I have my wife. She's a graphic designer and film editor. So she's just got her qualifications about a month ago. So that's awesome. And so she's full time now on the team. So it's the two of us for now. And we have an editor as well, a script editor, and we have a fourth that's sort of part time. But for now, it's my wife and I. And every single image that you see is hand drawn. It's hand drawn on an iPad.
Wow.
People don't realize that. And
cool.
It's pretty cool. And what's awesome about animation and about us, drawing and creating them from scratch is that we can really, we can explain things the way we envision it. If I want to draw a spine and show exactly how a disc is herniated, I can draw that process. Because to explain it just through words or through some generic sort of B-roll that you put on top of, it's just, you're not going to be able to, people are not going to be able to understand and interpret what you're trying to say, precisely. So we're able to, cross that barrier through just drawing our own stuff. Unfortunately, though, the downside to that is it's very time consuming. So, we're not able to get out as much content as we'd like to for now.
I think that's the hard balance, isn't it, between like lots and lots of content and then a few bit of high quality content. Yeah. Like you can churn out. We could that's the sort of the dilemma that we fell into. We were churning out so much content of our own, and at the end of the day, just the quality just started going down because it was just like too much of it. But yeah, I feel like you need to have good quality content, which is what you're obviously doing.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier how we cover various topics. The downside to that is that every single within the health and fitness umbrella, every single sort of avenue is a whole field on its own, and sometimes we don't respect that. So, for example, I went down the rabbit hole of red light therapy, photobiomodulation, a couple of months ago. And I was like, this is really interesting to me. I read a few papers. I was intrigued. I was like, okay, great. I'm going to start putting out some content around this. But, I have to do a thorough research, of this field. Anyway, 4 months later, I was still reading and trying to understand, because light therapy is it's a whole science. It's unbelievable. It's a whole STEM field. And, you take those things for granted. And it taught me a valuable lesson, and that is, we've got to be careful with just sort of putting out information. We've got to really be meticulous about our research and make certain that whatever we post online is as valid as can be. It's never going to be perfect, but it's going to be as accurate and as valid as possible. But it requires time. So I'm sort of in the camp of, I understand the guys like Gary Vee and that you've got to be pumping out content all the time, and I get it. I totally get it. And that's sort of social media. These platforms reward you for that. But sort of when it comes to health and fitness, there's a bit of a responsibility that you have to give people as the best information you possibly can. And that requires a little extra time to be certain that that information cannot hurt anyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%.
And on the red light thing, because funnily enough, going back to the red light whole thing, I remember Jacob a couple months back sent me a photo of his bedroom, and you installed this red light system. And I was like, what's going on here? It's really confusing, because obviously not a lot of people would have heard of this whole red light.
What I installed when I showed you, and I haven't told you this yet, and because I wanted to bring it up here, let it be a surprise. But so I've been using just like red bulbs just for my eyes, just during the night. It's less strenuous on your eyes. But very recently, like a week ago, I actually got a Juve. And because I watched your videos probably 1,000 times, and then some other research on my own. And I remember you said in one of your things that it was the first study that you'd seen, to your knowledge, on red light therapy and vitamin D, linking those studies together, and which was really cool. It's like, okay, you're doing original research right now. This is like epic. But yeah, so I've got a Juve. I've got a Juve, and I've been using that because I've got some health injuries, and I really want to recover properly. But yeah, your studies that you've shown have been like amazing. They were like probably the best studies that I've seen, and I probably went down the 4-month route as well, just like studying everything. So yeah, but yeah, what were you going to say about
that's so good. Yeah, but it was funny. I remember you sending that photo, and it was just like your room is red, and I was like, what is going on, man? But for young people that maybe aren't aware, like probably a lot of young people wouldn't have heard of light therapy. Give us just a little sort of a brief explanation into what red light therapy is.
Okay, well, light in general, the science is exploding at the moment, because what scientists are realizing is that we're like living solar panels. Humans need light. We need light to regulate our sleep, and it affects our hormonal balance. we absorb vitamins through. I mean, our body makes vitamins like vitamin D through UV light, and the sun, for example, emits a very broad spectrum of light. Everything from very short, high frequency light, UV light, for example, to very far infrared, long wavelengths that kind of help heat up the earth and things like that. And our body's very good at absorbing all of that full spectrum of light. So all that red light therapy is a narrow band of light that they've been able to isolate, or bands of light, because there's a few bands that they've isolated, one in the red spectrum and one in the near infrared spectrum, that our body is able to absorb really well, sort of better than others. And they've investigated and they've found that our tissues respond to that light in a profound way. We get benefits like cell proliferation and reproduction, cell repair. Cells that are damaged may sort of decompose faster, so that our body's able to clear them out. The list goes on, and I really recommend you go watch those videos because we go into depth. But light is something, it's a missing piece of a lot of people's puzzle at the moment, health and fitness puzzle, because we spend so much time indoors in the absence of this broad spectrum of light. And I think it's a really big health problem these days. It's super artificial. I mean, if you think back, I wasn't living in that time, but if I had to think back to before the Industrial Revolution, I imagine that people were outside way more than they were indoors. So they were naturally being exposed to these spectrums of light. And just to clarify with that, red and infrared light, these frequencies of light that are emitted through these boxes like the Juve, the sun emits those frequencies for free. We don't need to buy anything. They're available for us. But these companies have created products that, because they realize people are just not going to get outside, so we've sort of brought the light inside now, which is quite funny if you think about it. We have something that's available outside, it's free, but we end up purchasing lights so that we can bring the light inside because it's more convenient. But I think it's a testament to how we have drifted away from sort of these natural rhythms and the way that humans have been living for thousands of years. We've really made a massive shift over the past sort of 150 years or so. And I think it's taking its toll. So light's just one of those things that I've dabbled in and I've found very interesting. And I think that the science is really going to expand in that direction. And we're going to see so much more. There's green lights and and blue lights and all types of different spectrums of light that we don't even know what the effects are. So it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds moving forward.
I think it's so cool because I think all it takes is one person or one group of people to launch a study into something, and then everyone jumps on the bandwagon. And I think that's what's happened with red light therapy at the moment. It was this really sort of small, nuanced little thing, and it's just exploded for the better because now everyone's just And I really like the idea, even though whenever I bring it up at parties, I'm like that guy that gets shunned. But like the idea of biohacking and doing whatever you can to sort of integrate all these things into your life that you otherwise wouldn't have done in a more natural fashion. And so red light therapy is obviously an example of that. But yeah, I've got all these like biohacking. Every time I bring it up, it's just like people roll their eyes. But then you get talking about it, and people start to see the research, and they go, "Oh, that's what Jacob was talking about. Oh, that's what exercising health. That's what that video was all about." So it's really cool. What are some of the other biohacking things that you? I don't want to like spoil too much for your audience at the moment, but yeah, like some of the things that you're looking at the moment.
I mean, obviously exercise is massive. I think that's become common knowledge now. But I think, exercise in the context of just movement. So, I had this conversation with my wife the other day. I was saying, in the past, there was no really such thing as exercise. It was just physical activity. Sort of our lives depended on physical activity. If we didn't walk down to go fetch water out the well that was half a kilometer down, we wouldn't have fresh water to drink or to bath. If we didn't go out into the fields and forage for whatever, we wouldn't eat. And I think just by design, the lifestyle was physical activity was part of life and part of survival. And, we don't need to actually move. We don't need to move past the couch nowadays to survive. And actually, in a way to thrive, we can make tons of money from our laptops nowadays. So it's really, we're now forced to take time out and exercise. It's our way of moving and of, expending energy and making the body sort of, do what it's been doing for thousands of years really well, sort of forcing it to do it again. And so that's a big thing. But I really believe that the perception needs to change. People need to start thinking more along the lines of physical activity as a necessity for survival and to thrive, and less of it as exercise, as this structured, it's 1 hour per day, and like I'll sit all day and I'll sit behind my desk, and then as long as I do that 1 hour, I'll be fine. No, it's like we need to be moving all the time. We need to look for as many opportunities as possible. By right, we shouldn't even need to dedicate that 1 hour, because we should be doing so much physical activity, organically, that 1 hour is unnecessary. That dedicated structured time, because we get so much physical activity throughout the day or throughout the week or throughout the month. And I understand that it's not always practical, and, people have jobs, and, a lot of the time that requires to be behind. My research, for example, I spend, hours and hours a day behind the computer just reading. So I understand and I relate to that. But we got to look for different ways. So, for example, I found one of the blessings of the lockdown is that I built a home gym. And this home gym has put physical activity, a sort of playground, into my house. And as a result, I'm able to take frequent sort of intervals, while I'm working, and go and do like a set of 10 pull-ups, go and, I don't know, invert on a wall and just sort of load my shoulders up with my body weight, or, I don't know, whatever, go and do 100 double unders, whatever the case is, just some movement. And that's been really, really awesome. I also started running. Running has been something I've sort of dabbled in. I've been very interested in the way the body runs and movement and barefoot running and all of that. But I haven't taken running myself very seriously, actively partaking in races or trying to better my minutes per kilometer or whatever. But recently, because of the lockdown, I've sort of been pushed and nudged into that direction, and I really enjoy it. It's one of our most primal human movements, to run. I mean, one could argue that walking and running is not even an exercise. It's a form of basic locomotion. It's how people moved from point A to point B. Now it's looked upon as an exercise, like it's something special. Not like it is something special, but I mean, it's something like that you have to, like, sport. I mean, but running is actually our mode of transport, for thousands of years. And it's crazy. It's like we've lost our formal mode of transport that our ancestors for generations and generations were using. And I mean, that's how they survived. So getting into that, and sort of, for me, it's like tapping into my past, my genetic past, and discovering these really cool ways of moving the body, and also realizing how terrible I am at them. It's unbelievable.
It's a humbling experience.
100%, definitely. Yeah. So I'm quite grateful in many ways for the past few months, and it's really been an eye opener for me. And something else I'd add is, I realized that you cannot teach unless you have applied it, at least try to apply it to your own life. So that's what we really try and stand for with Exercising Health is we'll never make a piece of content, or we'll never recommend anything that I'm not willing to try, and I don't believe in. I wouldn't apply it to my own life. So I think that's a very long answer, but that's pretty much.
Man. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so exercise. Yeah.
Yeah, go on. You wanted to say something?
So just to kind of conclude, exercise is massive, and I think that let's say physical activity is massive, and that way of thinking I think is one of the biggest biohacks that we can have. Just constant motion.
Yeah.
It's really important, and I think not just from a fitness perspective, but I think that the body responds to movement. It's like water. You leave water with, it's not moving for a while, and it starts to become, murky. Bacteria starts growing in. Anything that's living needs to be moving all the time. And, if you take a water and you leave it still for 23 hours and 59 minutes a day, and then you shake it for 1 minute rigorously and then leave it for another, I don't know how pure and healthy that water is going to be in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be moving like all the time. So that's, I like to think of the human body in a similar way. We're made of a lot of water, and that water needs to be flowing, and our blood needs to be moving, and our lymph needs to be draining, and it's constant motion. Being static is one of our biggest enemies to our health. So, it's really important.
I think that's 100%. Like, I couldn't have said it better myself. And it's something that I preach all the time to anyone that's like I've got a lot of friends that are sort of, I guess we all have these sorts of friends because it's so common nowadays that aren't doing much physical activity. And they usually say it's like, well, I'm getting older and stuff like that. And usually they're not very old, they're like 50 or 60. And I was reading a study the other day that basically showed a case study of people, I think they were in their 60s, maybe their 70s, of a group of people who didn't work out at all, and then they took another group in the same age bracket who did work out, and their telomere lengths and their mitochondrial density of the group of the case study of people who did work out was almost 10 years biologically younger than those who were not working out. So literally working out is literally an anti-aging effect. Yeah. So it's a no-brainer in my opinion. Yeah, gonna live longer.
Insulin resistance. Let's talk about that for a second. So type 2 diabetes, syndrome X, they call it. It's basically the body struggles to metabolize sugar and to shuttle sugar into storage, basically. So when we eat a bunch of glucose, a bunch of sugars, carbohydrates, then our blood sugar spikes, and our body secretes insulin, and insulin transports that glucose into tissue. But it prefers, or it can store it in muscle tissue and in our livers. Muscle tissue is a far bigger warehouse and has far bigger capacity than our livers do. So our livers fill up, and then it starts putting it into our muscle tissue. But eventually that fills up too, especially on a modern Western diet, which is really high carbohydrate. And what happens when there's no more place to shuttle this glucose in? Well, our blood levels start to increase, and it becomes chronic. And our body responds to that by converting it into fat. And we start to fill up fat cells. So my point is, yes, diet's really important, and we can try and eat a healthier diet, and we can improve on this. But we can also build more muscle tissue. We can have a bigger warehouse. If you're not exercising, you're not strength training, you don't have, you don't have good body composition. Well, your body's not going to be very forgiving of the diet. Your diet's going to have to be precise all the time. Otherwise, if you go and you have a night out and you have too much food and you have dessert and you have whatever, which we all humans, we do it. Well, when your body's got massive capacity and lots of muscle tissue and you're exercising all the time, well, it's very forgiving in that regard. A couple of nights every now and again is not going to hurt you. But when you don't have that and your body composition is not that great, your body's not forgiving at all. And those little errors and mistakes, they really have a profound impact on the body. So I think that exercise ties in so well to the diet as well. And we can really get the most out of our diets if we exercise and we move and we have muscle mass and we strength train. So I really think it permeates through, that's the awesome thing about health. When you think something doesn't relate to, one facet of the health doesn't relate to other, you're totally mistaken, because everything connects. It's like a very dense web. And I think sort of the center is definitely, somewhere in there is exercise or physical activity, because really it ties into pretty much everything.
Yeah, 100%. One of the things that I think is really helping with this, and I'm going to start doing it myself because I think it's just such a cool idea. And in fact, I think when I first started and failed at sort of the self-blogging, like Instagram stuff, which I'm just not good at all, but you did the exercising health challenges, which I thought was really cool. My favorite one that you did was the no sitting for how long did you do that for? Was it like a week?
A week, yeah.
Yeah, dude, that's like, because one of the things you said was, most of our standing periods of time during our lives is just from one seated position transitioning to another seated position, from the car to your office desk, or from your desk at home to your desk in the kitchen where you're about to eat your lunch or something. And that was one of the things, I've said it on the podcast 100 times, but let's make it 101, is when I was studying at uni, I had some major health issues during that time. And it was because I was sitting at home, then I'd get on in the car on the way to the station, then I'd sit on the train on the way to uni, then I'd sit down for a 2 or a 4 hour lecture, like 3 or 4 times a day.
Very stagnant. Yeah.
Then you'd sit down eating lunch, then you'd finally get home, you have some time to yourself. And what do? You sit down to do more assignments or to play video games or whatever you're doing. And it's just like, I've probably been standing for maybe 10 minutes all day, and it's just like, it's the harsh reality. I think the average Westerner, if my memory serves me right, is sitting for upwards of 13 hours a day. So when you think that we should be sleeping for about 8, so that leaves just 3 hours, of movement. And I think, if I think about sort of my observational data, I think that's really being generous, those 3 hours. On many days, it's being very generous. So it's quite scary how it's sort of, like I said earlier, it's sort of reversed our lifestyle, to where it was in the past, where I think our ancestors were moving or on their feet for 13 hours a day, and maybe static for 3. And they were sleeping for a lot longer as well. But a very, very simple observation you can make is you can just look at the skin underneath your hands and your feet, and you'll just see how much tougher that skin is. And that's because it's a weight bearing surface. And if you look at our bums don't have that same skin. So if we were meant to sit on our bum all day, then we would have the same skin that our feet and our hands have underneath our buttocks, but we don't. So that's a very, very simple way of showing somebody that, hey, we're not meant to sit all day.
If we did, we would have, that skin underneath our bums. But we spend more time on our bums than we do on our feet. And we're not built that way. We haven't evolved to do that. Clearly, we haven't. So, it has its issues. Directly, for example, is lower back pain. That's something I've, really become interested in. Why people suffer with lower back pain. And you know that 80% of the world's workforce will have back pain at some point in their lives. And of those, more than half will have reoccurring chronic back pain.
Yeah.
And you've got to ask yourself why. And we always got to, when we're trying to understand why things happen, we got to look at sort of what are the most significant trends. And one of them is sitting. We sit way too much. And that's definitely a contributing factor, one of the dominant ones. So, we're really doing our bodies, ourselves a disservice by spending so much time on the chair. And I don't know what's the best way forward. I've got a standing desk. I have a gym now at home, and that sort of prompts me to move more. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know on a mass scale how we're going to solve this problem. It's a difficult one. It's a really difficult one.
It's hard because I think most of it will, like, for your health and fitness enthusiasts, like, it's a no-brainer. We're already in that sort of world, and it's not hard to tip it from, that 1 hour workout a day to just being active all day. Like, that's an easy thing to sort of communicate to that industry of people. But to the broader community of people, which are often, overlooked because we're sort of tunnel visioned in our own little world.
That's true.
You have to consider the psychological aspect of that. And I think that's such a major, major part, because it's about getting people just off their butts in the very literal sense and getting forward to do that. But I don't know any easy solution to that.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this at length, and one thing I can say is that a lot more needs to be done in schools. Youngsters need to be pushed into, from the first grade, you already start learning how to sit for, 6-7 hours, on your chair. And you can see kids always look like they got ants in their pants, because they just want to move the whole time. You can't get them to sit still. And we force them to sit still, like sit down, stop moving. And it's this, I think we got to promote movement more instead of condemning it, in the youth. Sit for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, focus, do your thing, and then get up and move around, let kids do what they want to do naturally. Yeah. And in that way, you can start to, instead of conditioning them to sit all the time to the point where they don't want to move after a while, we kind of preserve that natural instinct in them to move. And because no one can deny it. You look at any toddler, they're constantly moving. When they're not sleeping, they're up and down. And people say, how do these kids have so much energy? Well, it's actually a very natural thing. It's just we've conditioned ourselves over many years we've lost that. We've lost that completely. But I think it exists in all of us. So I think it starts with the youngsters, and we need to really put physical activity higher up on our priorities with the youth. So that's really important. I think that's probably the best way forward.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I've got two teacher friends of mine that teach primary school, and this is only anecdotal. I haven't read any studies on this, but my mum said the same thing, that when she was a kid, that they think that ADHD in kids is on the rise. It's like, and I keep saying, is it though? I think these are just kids. Like when I was a kid, I was the same. I had ants in my pants, as you said, because I just didn't want to sit down for 5-6 hours a day. And then you get home and you do more homework and sit down. It's like, I just want to run around. And I think that's what kids are supposed to do. They're just supposed to run themselves stupid until they. Well,
let me ask you a question. If we took all technology away and we lived very primitively, do you really think we would be able to survive like the majority of us? Probably not,
No.
because we don't have the skill set or that natural sort of motivation to do it. But I'll tell you, a lot of these ADHD kids will survive and they'll thrive, because they've got that in them. So perhaps this, it's a misdiagnosis, because perhaps these kids were the ones that were, the real shining stars in those times, where they were the ones that were getting up and doing things and providing for everybody, because they've got this, their blood just pumps faster than everyone else's, and they're just ready to go all the time. And that was what was needed. But it just doesn't serve them well in this day and age, when everything's very much up here and less, like whatever is below the sort of nose doesn't really matter. So, and that's a problem. We've really put this part on a pedestal, which is great, and it's helped us advance in many ways, but we've sort of left this sort of by the wayside and just forgotten about it. And that's a bit of an issue. So I think perhaps these kids need to be appreciated more. And we need to realize that, these are certain gifts that they have. And it may not be perfect for the desk, but in other ways, it's probably can be very useful. So we just need to figure out ways for them to conditions for them to thrive in, as opposed to trying to force them to not express themselves the way that they naturally express themselves.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Absolutely. And another thing that we see a lot, especially in young people, is it seems to be the numbers of mental illness cases seem to be rising. Anxiety and depression are incredibly prevalent among young people, which is really sad to see, of course. But do you see a link? There seems to be, especially in this modern age, the health society, like the health world, seems to be really acknowledging the link between mental health and physical health. What's your thoughts on that sort of link between mental and physical health? Do you think there's a real relationship there between the mind and the body?
Definitely. Vitamin D is a big one. There's studies that link vitamin D to all kinds of disorders, sleeping disorders and issues like that. So it causes psychological issues, depression and stuff. So just the fact of being, not being outside and, having access to light, having sufficient vitamin D levels, having this light to be able to regulate sleep. I think that's a massive thing. It's sort of a little bit out of my realm, mental health, so I won't say too much about it, because I'm not very well learned in that regard. But definitely, I think that the body plays a major role in supporting our psychology. So if the body is healthier, definitely the mind is going to benefit from that. Just purely my opinion, I think that kids also, they are in a way frustrated, like we spoke about with the ADHD kids. They're frustrated. They have this willingness to move and exercise and play and whatever, but, we've sort of boxed them in, and I see what youngsters have to do, how much homework and how much schoolwork they've got to do. It's incredible. And I'm like, Shane, these kids need to move. They need to be outside. And then, things like video games as well. It's become very violent. These video games, you play all day and you're shooting people all day long. And I'm certain that it's going to have some type of long-term effect, as opposed to just playing a sport outside. Or doing something, building something. I don't know. Instead of, humans are builders. We are meant to build things. We're meant to create. If you spend all your day shooting people and distracting, you're going to self-destruct.
Yeah,
we're meant to build
point.
things up. When a kid learns how to build a shed, learns how to ride a bike, learns how to build a bicycle, is starting to progress in the sport. He's building something, and this, it really has a profound effect on himself or herself. They start to feel like they're building themselves up. But if all day long you're just shooting people and destroying everything that's in your path, well, you start to destroy yourself too. I'm pretty sure of that.
Yeah.
And I think humans need to start appreciating progress and building. We're all builders in our own way. We're trying to build a body. We're trying to build our lifestyle. We're trying to build our relationships with our loved ones. We're trying to always build. And as long as we're builders, I think we're happy. As soon as this destruction in our lives and things are falling apart, we start to feel unhappy. And that doesn't mean that destruction in some way or form is always going to be inevitable, but it's to pick up those pieces and to have the confidence because you're a good builder and you've built so many things in your life that you can be like, it's fine, I'll fix it. I'll build it up again. It's not an issue. We know what we're doing. But if you've never practiced, well, you sort of feel lost. You feel like, well, how am I going to get back from this? Because I don't even know where to start. I've never had to do anything like this in my life before. So I don't know. It's just sort of my own opinion. And I think kids need to be kids, and they need to just do kids things, and they just need to find themselves and build and progress. And I think that's going to be the most beneficial.
I think, you hit the nail on the head. That was something that I was going to say as well, is something that I've been seeing. And again, those teacher friends of mine have said the same thing. It's getting easier to get kids to sit down because, as we said, it's not an easy thing to do when you put a screen straight in front of them. And that's a big part of the education system now, is you all on screens, all on laptops, and especially during this quarantine period, it's been, but there's something about the blue light that comes off a screen that just releases dopamine, which is just like gets kids transfixed. And it's like, they just forget about everything, from the nose down, as you put it, which is really, really scary.
Casinos, why are there so many lights in casinos?
Yeah.
Why is it full of lights?
Yeah.
It's there to elicit a dopamine response so that you can feel good about yourself and you can continue to gamble. Yeah. And you lose the perception of there's no windows. You will never see a window in a casino, ever. Yeah. They don't want you to know. They want you to lose touch with reality and what's really going outside, what the time of day is, everything. They want you to be totally absorbed in the bright lights and everything that's going around you. And it's highly, highly addictive. And they reward you with sounds and bells and all types of stuff whenever you win. And they've realized, and they've been very successful because of it. And I think that in many ways, the games that kids play and iPads and all of that and the nature of a lot of the apps kind of do the same thing. And they reward that behavior. And that's why kids can't put the damn things down, So we need to reward behavior that's, to go outside and play and do those types of things. I said to my wife, look, I'm not a parent yet, and I think I'll have a lot to learn. I'll probably look back and cringe at this conversation and be like, oh, I was so ignorant. But you know what? I said to my wife, what I'd love to do is, to give more incentive one day. I want to create an outside area for the kids so that there's more incentive to be outdoors than there is to be indoors. I want indoors to be boring. I want them to be like, it's so boring inside. Yeah, but outside is cool. Outside is so cool. Yeah. There's like adventure and they can do whatever they want outside and it's just epic to be outside. So, that's sort of how we want to do it. We want to reward them with that, with just being outdoors more. And we hope that, that'll have long-term benefits. So we'll see. For us as well. I mean, sometimes it takes a lot for me to get outside. I've also been, I've gotten so used to just, being inside all the time. So.
Are you a fan of Ben Greenfield? Do you know Ben Greenfield?
Yeah, I've been following his podcast for a long time.
Yeah, well, I was listening to his podcast recently, one of his episodes, and he briefly talked about his twin boys, and I don't know how old they are. They're pretty young, like 10 or 11 years old, and he homeschools them, or he likes to call it no schooling. They still do standardized testing. Apparently, they do pretty well, but he reckons he could just drop them like out in the wilderness and they just like survive because they're just savages, because that's just all they do all day. They just go out and they learn how to hunt, and they're doing jiu-jitsu all day, and they're just doing all these crazy things. And as you said, like inside's not really like the place to be, unless it's for recovery, like sleeping and, you know, and learning and things like that. There's a time and place for inside, of course. But yeah, I think that's a really, beneficial place for a kid to be. I think it's important to do that, because I was looking after a kid, a friend of mine. I was babysitting their kid, and they came around. And the first thing they said was, "Do you have any games on your phone?" And I was like, "No, but I've got a world outside. Would you like to see that? I have a garden that you can play in."
See this round thing? It's a soccer ball. You know, it bounces and you can kick it to each other. A rugby ball, it's like an oval thing.
No, it's insane. But we spent all day just like running around, took them down to the park, and there was something that Burrs wanted to ask about barefoot, because you brought it up before, barefoot running, which is what I'm a big fan of.
I mean, it's an interesting thing, because you've gotten into it a lot recently about like you're going on hikes barefoot. I mean, me personally, and I think a lot of young people, like I'm really proud of my sneaker collection, you know, wearing shoes and stuff. But it seems to be a big thing that you're pushing in exercising and health about this barefoot phenomenon. And it is interesting when Jacob explains it to me. So did you want to dive into that a little bit and maybe give people a bit of an insight to what this whole barefoot phenomenon is about?
Sure. Well, I'll preface it with this one. Whenever I'm looking at because within the health space, even within academia, I can take and I can bring you a list of studies now that say that traditional running shoes, with arch support and, built up soles, and that anti-pronation shoes or whatever are highly beneficial for you. And then I can find a bunch of academic published papers that say the opposite. And now what? Who do we believe? Because both are published studies. And, you've got to look deeper. You've got to look at the methodology. You've got to critique all of that. And then you've got to do a lot of research so that you can start to see common threads, and you can start to tie in all these pieces together. But one thing that people that I often tell people is that we should also just use our logic. We've got this logic. It's just critical thinking. That's the most simple thing in the world. We were born without shoes. We were not born with arch support things on our feet. We weren't born with anti-pronation, this and that and the other. We were born with feet. And if we look at how kids are all flat-footed, and as they grow older, their muscles and tensions and fascia and whatever is supposed to tension up, and they're supposed to eventually have a nice arch. This is a natural thing that happens, and a sort of adaptation. So sort of we need to, critically thinking, we would look at that and would say, okay, how can we assist this natural process to happen more efficiently, as opposed to saying, maybe this person's foot hasn't developed and properly, they don't have an arch, so therefore we'll just stick a piece of AVA foam underneath it, and EVA foam underneath it, and that'll solve the issue. It's like, okay, but why did their foot not develop properly? What's the root cause of the problem? Is there a different way? Is there a way that we can, their structures are still there. It's not like they just disappeared. They're there, they're just not working properly. So how can we make them work again? So everything needs to be looked at critically, and needs to be looked at logically. So I'm very much in the camp of trying to, when it comes to with barefoot and with everything else health related, is to see how things used to be, and sort of get some clues of how things should be nowadays from that. And when it comes to barefoot, it just makes so much sense to me. And I've got that list of literature to back my claims up, and my whatever. So I'm fine. But if you're trying to decide which way to go, just use your logic. And it just makes so much sense. So basically our feet have layers of muscle, and we have connective tissue, and this is supposed to support our feet and support an arch in our foot. And this arch and our toes, and there's actually loads of bones in our feet, and those are supposed to articulate and move and adjust themselves to the environment, because it's really our only contact point to the ground and to the environment that we're moving upon. So they've got to transmit forces up and down the body. So as we exert force through the glutes, that's got to go down into the foot, through the foot into the ground, and then we get ground reaction forces back up. So that's sort of our conductor, and everything moves through the foot. So it needs to function well, and the more we can sort of preserve those structures, and we can build them up, the better we are at movement. It's that simple. It's really not that complex. The sort of the nutshell is not that complex. It's just, how do we make ourselves better at our natural structures? How do we support our natural structures to do what they were designed to do? And barefoot running and barefoot shoes, and that capture that the best, in my opinion.
Yeah, I scoured, again, I've said this a few times now. I must be sounding like you're a fangirl, but I scoured all your videos to find the best barefoot shoes when I was selecting those, and I went with the Vivo barefoot, so we're like pretty good. So one of a broader question that I sort of wanted to ask you as well was, it sort of ties back to how we can achieve the psychological aspect of reaching as many people as we can to build a stronger community. If I was heavily embedded in the health and fitness industry, even just me as an individual right now, my goal is to build the strongest community as possible and let that community expand. And I mean strong-minded and strong-bodied in all facets that you can sort of think of. What's as the CEO of Exercising Health, what's your sort of broad look at things? Like, what's your goal for the community that you're reaching out to at the moment?
Yeah, so I mean that's an ongoing process. But what I will say, my whole thought patterns with this type of thing, and exactly how we're going to capture it. But what has never changed, and what will never change, is that, yes, we would love, and from a business perspective, we'd love to have the whole world following us, because then, we would do really well. But in reality, it started off right in the beginning, and I really hope that I never lose sight of this. And it's just to help as many people as possible, and to provide good information. But it doesn't always have to come from me directly to all these people. You have spoken, I'm sure, like you've mentioned, you've spoken to people about the content that we've created. And you've been sort of you've relayed that message on. And I don't know who those people are, and it doesn't really matter to me as long as they get the message. So if they get it through you, and it derived from a piece of content that we made, as long as it reaches those people, we're satisfied. So it's not really about reaching, everyone. It's just, how can we service our community as best as possible? And how can we give them, even if we never grow to be this humongous brand, with tens of millions of followers. But, even if we stay, relatively small, that's okay, as long as we give the best service possible. And through those people, through educating these people and providing them with really good content over a long period of time, we give them the skill sets and the knowledge to then go and help more people. and sit at a restaurant in conversation and say, oh, just by the way, I learned this and this and this. They don't even need to reference us through conversation. That's okay. It would be nice, but it's okay as long as that information's getting out there. And I think it's we're doing the world a good service that way. So I guess that's sort of what we hope for in the long run. I always get when I see people. We were driving with my wife the other day, and I saw a guy walking the street with a pair of Vivos, and I was like, "Look, he's got Vivos on. He's got Vivos on." I don't know who he is. I've never met the guy. I just saw him walking, but I got joy of seeing somebody wear those shoes because I understand the benefits that they provide, and it was just awesome to see somebody. And I didn't stop and say, "Oh, by the way, we promote these shoes, and you should follow us on Exercising Health." No, it's like. I was just happy to see the guy wearing those shoes, because I know that he's probably going to hopefully get a lot of benefit out of them. So, that's what we would like to see. We'd just like to see people outdoors more. Something that another positive of this whole lockdown is we were fortunate in Cyprus to be allowed to go outside and exercise. And I saw so many people, way more than normal, going out for walks during the day and running. And now that the lockdown's been lifted, it's gone back to normal and we don't see people so much outside anymore. It's quite ironic. It's like when they had to stay indoors, they were outside more because they were given that little bit of leeway and they were using it. Now that they don't have to be inside all the time, they're choosing to be inside. Maybe it's at a coffee shop or maybe it's at a mall or something like that. But, they're not outside, like in the sun and exercising and things like that or moving rather. So, anyway, it was a joy to see during that period people just outside and more active. So for us, if we can start to see the world shift towards more of, healthy lifestyle, and we can see some of these things that we talk about come into fruition, on a mass scale. It doesn't really matter if it came directly from us, as long as it happens. And that's what we'd like to see.
Absolutely. So good. Well, as we come towards the end of our chat here, just to wrap up, there's been so many great nuggets of information that I think a lot of young people can take from this chat that we've had. But what is the number one tip that you would give to specifically young people? So our target audience is sort of like 16 to, I guess, 30, you would say. What's maybe one key problem that you see specifically with young people in regards to health and fitness, and maybe what's one piece of advice that you would give to them?
So it's not thinking of the future. It's so difficult though, because I remember, I went through like a sort of bodybuilding phase, and I have a lot of respect for bodybuilding, don't get me wrong. But, I just wanted to be the biggest and most muscular guy. At some stage, I went through this thing, and sometimes you've got to make a lot of sacrifices, health sacrifices, to get to those, to that point. And, things like anabolic steroids and, things that, can have a very negative effect on your health. And the point I'm trying to make is that, when you want to achieve these short-term goals, you don't think of what's the long-term repercussions of the decisions I'm making right now. And even in training, youngsters want to progress really quickly. They see their role models on TV, on YouTube, doing whatever, some type of sporting feat, and they're like, I want to be like that, and I'm going to work super hard. And, that unfortunately, they also say to you, you've got to work hard and you mustn't sleep and you must do whatever. But in reality, it's not the case. You've got to, progress is not linear. Progress is sort of wavy. And one of the biggest sort of barriers to progress is injuries and health problems. They really make you take a massive step backwards. So if we can progress slightly slower, but we sort of mitigate all the risk of that happening, we end up progressing in the long run far more than we would have ever if we try to rush things in the beginning. So I really think that youngsters should look at things in a long-term perspective. And I think this can really, do well in other facets of life, like finance and things like that as well. Whenever you take the long-term approach, we're trying to do that with our business. We've been approached by a lot of different brands to work with us. We've done some research we didn't really believe, and we've turned down that money, and that's a short term. It's hurt us in the short term, but we know in the long term we're going to keep the trust of our audience. Everything we ever recommend to our audience is something that we really believe in, and over time, our audience will we develop this trust and loyalty and this belief in exercising health, that we have their best interest at heart, and that we're not just trying to serve ourselves. Again, that's a long-term approach. And we miss out a lot in the short term, but that's okay, because ultimately we benefit in the end. So I think when it comes to health, just as difficult as it may be, try and sacrifice short-term gratification, and really look at things from a long-term perspective, and work towards. One short little example is, people say to me. People ask me, like, what's the point in squatting? Why do you need to squat? What's the point in squatting with hundreds of kilograms on your back? I said to them, okay, well, we're going to get to a point eventually, all of us, where, our strength starts to diminish over time, and it's going to happen. We all hit this sort of peak in our physical capabilities. But if you've built up enough of strength reserve, when you're young, and let's say you can squat 100 kilos comfortably with full arse to the grass type of thing, chances are that when you're in your 70s and 80s, if you're lucky enough to get there, you'll be able to stand up off a chair and support your own body weight. Even if you're 10 kilos overweight at that time, you'll probably be able to support your own body weight without assistance.
Yeah.
But if you don't squat, and you've never built up that strength reserve, and you still have the decline from your peak, which is much lower than someone else's peak who's done some type of strength training, chances are at that stage, if you've a couple of kilos overweight or whatever, that you might not even have the strength to support your own body weight. And we see this in the elderly, not being able to get up off a chair by themselves. And it's really sad, because up here they're 100%, but down here they just lose all their abilities. And I often wonder, how is it that some are able to, at 80 years old, function normally, walk up and down stairs, pick things up, no problem, and while others can't. And it's just because they never took that long-term approach, to their health. And so that's something that's really important. And that's why I squat. It's for that. So that hopefully later on in life, if I get there, I'll still be able to do pretty much everything I want to do or I need to do at that time without too much assistance. But it's really difficult. Even I'm almost 30 and I struggle to think that way. For a 16-year-old, I can imagine, and if I recall, it's not always easy to think long-term. But the more you can think long-term, the better it's going to serve you in the long term. So yeah.
I think that's some really humble and altruistic advice for young people and the elderly as well, because they're going to be benefiting from all these little nuggets, as you would put it.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming on, Chris. It's been such an honor to talk to you. Did you want to plug yourself a little bit before we head off?
Yeah, you can find us on YouTube, YouTube.com/exercising health. You can find us on Instagram as well, exercising health. And follow our stuff, drop us a comment, drop us a DM as well. We're happy to always chat and get to know our audience. We try and reply to, especially on Instagram, to every single DM that we get. It's not always easy, and sometimes it takes me a couple of days, sometimes a week, to get back, but we always get back to every single comment and question, and we try our best to help people that are interested in what we have to say.
Absolutely.
So hopefully we'll have our own podcast one of these days. That's definitely something for the future. And then we'll also have you guys on our side, and I'll be asking you guys some questions too.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Looking forward to it for sure.
Certainly are. Well, we'll have those links in the description. It's Exercising Health. Go check them out. And especially if you like animation, because there's plenty of animation going on.
Yeah, exactly.
on YouTube and Instagram. Well, again, Chris from Exercising Health, thanks so much for featuring on this week's episode of the Young People Podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thank you guys for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.